Ariana Brooks felt the weight of strangers' eyes before she even reached her seat, as if every step down the narrow aisle was being quietly measured. The low drone of the aircraft's air system mixed with the shuffling of feet and the muted rattle of carry-ons being lifted into overhead bins. She kept her chin level, her hands steady on the strap of her worn leather bag. The smell of coffee clung faintly to her clothes, a reminder of the cup she'd forced herself to sip at dawn before heading to Liberty International Airport. Her father's voice from the night before pressed gently against her thoughts. Trust your instincts, but trust the truth more. It had been said with the calm certainty of a man who had navigated storms both literal and human. Ariana clung to that sentence the way a swimmer might hold a life ring, though she could not yet guess just how much she would need it. The trip itself was not one she had wanted to take. Los Angeles was not a vacation. This time it was where her grandmother's body lay in a small funeral home, waiting for the family to gather. Ariana's asthma always worsened in the stress of travel, but she had her inhaler in an easy-to-reach pocket and a medical ID bracelet snug against her wrist. The boarding gate had been crowded with travelers who mostly avoided each other's eyes. A few glanced at Ariana's carry-on, its leather handle cracked with age, perhaps wondering how it had survived so many miles. She had grown used to people trying to read her story from the outside. Now, moving down the aisle toward first class, she kept a slow, measured pace, careful not to bump anyone. Her ticket said, Seat 2A, a window seat near the front. But as she stepped into the row, she saw it was already occupied. A man in a pressed navy suit and a gold watch sat with a laptop open, the air around him charged with the unspoken assumption that he belonged there. Before Ariana could speak, a voice like a gavel struck from behind her. "Miss, coach seating is toward the rear. This section is full." She turned to see a tall woman with a tightly wound bun and a uniform crisp enough to have been ironed moments ago. Her name tag read, Colleen Draper. Colleen's expression carried the kind of polite firmness that allowed no argument. "My boarding pass says 2A, Ariana said softly, holding it out. Colleen glanced at it without taking it, her eyes flicking between Ariana's face and her clothes, a simple sweater, jeans, and scuffed sneakers. "We had a last-minute adjustment. You'll be in 23F today. Right side, back of the cabin." Ariana hesitated. She had never been one to challenge authority in public, not without a clear reason. The man in the suit did not look up from his laptop. "All right," she said quietly, stepping back into the flow of boarding passengers. In the row just behind her, a woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled into a loose braid watched the exchange. Her phone was already in her hand, the recording app a thumb's tap away. Lena Vasquez wasn't sure what she'd just seen, but the tone in the flight attendant's voice made her gut tighten. By the time Ariana reached her assigned seat in coach, the cabin felt warmer. She slid her carry-on into the overhead bin, the leather handle catching against the metal rim. She kept her inhaler in hand. Crowded flights often meant recycled air heavy with perfumes, colognes, or the faint chemical tang of cleaning agents, any of which could trigger an asthma episode. She settled into the narrow seat, pressing her bag under the seat in front of her. Her breathing was steady for now. The cabin around her was a small collage of American travel culture. A college kid in a university sweatshirt watching videos on his phone. An older couple sharing a crossword puzzle in the aisle seats. A mother whispering to her toddler about clouds and wings. Lena passed by on her way to her own seat farther back. Her eyes flicked to Ariana's hand. "Traveling alone?" she asked in a low tone. "Yes," Ariana said. "Family in Los Angeles." "Long trip," Lena said, then moved on, her voice carrying a hint of something that sounded like both concern and recognition. Ariana tucked the inhaler into her lap, her fingers brushing the cool metal of her bracelet. It caught the light in a way that reminded her of summers spent at her grandmother's house, where sunlight would pour through the kitchen window and gleam off the rim of an old copper pot. The memory steadied her. From the front of the cabin, Colleen's voice rose above the hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats quickly. We have a full flight this morning." As Ariana leaned back, her eyes drifted toward the forward section. She could just make out Colleen moving down the aisle, her gaze scanning passengers like a checklist. When their eyes met, the flight attendant's attention dropped to Ariana's lap. Her expression changed just slightly, but enough to make Ariana's stomach tighten. Colleen stopped at her row, one hand gripping the seatback in front of Ariana. "Where did you get that, miss?" she asked, gesturing to the inhaler. Ariana blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "This? It's mine. I asked where you got it," Colleen repeated, her voice lower but edged with a sharpness that drew the attention of the man across the aisle. "I've had it since last month. My prescription's on file in New Jersey," Ariana said. Colleen reached down and plucked the inhaler from Ariana's hands in one swift motion. "I'll need to verify this with the crew," she said. "That's my medication," Ariana said, the first threads of alarm tightening in her chest. Colleen's eyes flicked to the bracelet. "And what's that supposed to be?" "My medical ID. Fake jewelry doesn't count as documentation." Ariana felt the first faint hitch in her breathing, the one she'd learned to recognize before an episode began. Around her, passengers shifted in their seats. The college kid glanced up from his phone. The older couple exchanged a quiet look. Colleen stood with the inhaler in hand, as if she were holding a piece of contraband. "We'll see what the captain says," she remarked, turning away. The air in Ariana's lungs seemed suddenly heavier. She adjusted her posture, trying to draw a deeper breath without showing strain. The hum of the cabin was joined by a faint ringing in her ears. From a few rows back, Lena tilted her phone slightly, catching Colleen's retreating figure and Ariana's uneasy expression. She didn't start recording yet, but her thumb hovered over the red button. Ariana closed her eyes for a moment, hearing again her father's voice from the night before. Trust the truth more. The truth was simple. She had a prescription. She had the right to keep it with her. She had done nothing wrong. But the truth didn't seem to matter to the woman in the uniform who had already decided what she saw. When Ariana opened her eyes, the cabin light felt sharper. Colleen was already speaking to another crew member up front. The inhaler was gone from sight. The first flicker of panic rose, not from fear of confrontation, but from the physical knowledge that without that inhaler she was vulnerable. She sat still, watching the aisle, her breath shallow, her mind turning over her father's words and wondering when the truth would be enough. Colleen's voice cut through the boarding chatter once more, clear and loud enough to carry across the cabin. "Where did you get that, miss?" Colleen Draper plucked the inhaler from Ariana's hands, as if she were removing contraband from a criminal, her grip deliberate, her expression one of practiced suspicion. The cold absence of it left Ariana's palms feeling oddly exposed, the faint imprint of its ridged surface still pressed into her skin. She had been through enough asthma attacks to know the warning signs when they began to creep in tightness across the chest, a slow constriction of breath, but she refused to give Colleen the satisfaction of seeing panic in her eyes. The medical ID bracelet her mother had insisted she wear caught a beam from the overhead light, the silver disc momentarily flashing like a signal flare. Ariana thought about the morning when her mother had clasped it on her wrist before her first solo trip, explaining that it could save her life if she ever found herself unable to speak. Now, with the bracelet plainly visible, she waited for Colleen to read the engraved words. But the woman's eyes slid right over it, as if it were a trinket from a vending machine. The purpose of this moment wasn't lost on Ariana. This wasn't about safety. It was about someone deciding she didn't belong. Colleen's voice stayed even, but carried an undercurrent that everyone within earshot could hear. "We have to follow procedure for unverified medication. You can't just bring this on board without proper documentation." "I have a prescription," Ariana said. "It's filled at my pharmacy in Newark." "That's not documentation," Colleen replied, her tone final. "This could be anything. My responsibility is to keep the cabin safe." Her words drew glances from the surrounding seats. The man across the aisle leaned forward slightly, brows knitted, while an older woman 2 rows up lowered her magazine just enough to see Ariana's face. From the corner of her eye, Ariana caught a faint glint, the lens of a phone camera. Lena Vasquez, seated farther back, was angling her phone toward the scene, the record icon already blinking. Ariana swallowed, keeping her voice steady. "I need that to breathe. I have severe asthma." Colleen gestured toward the aisle with a flick of her hand. "If it's legitimate, you'll get it back once it's cleared. But right now, I have to treat this as a possible safety risk." The hum of the air vents seemed to grow louder in Ariana's ears. She pressed her hands together to hide the slight tremor that had started in her fingers. From 3 rows behind, a man with neatly combed gray hair watched closely. Dr. Samuel Park had been quietly assessing the situation since he boarded, noting Ariana's breathing patterns, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the faint wheeze he'd picked up when she'd sat down. He was a man who had seen countless emergencies in decades of practice, and something in his gut told him this was about to become one. He leaned into the aisle. "Excuse me," he said politely but firmly. "I'm a retired physician. That young lady is showing signs of respiratory distress." Colleen didn't even glance back at him. "Sir, please remain seated. This is a crew matter." The chill in her voice made it clear she considered the discussion over. But Ariana could feel her chest tightening, each breath pulling against an invisible resistance. Her hand hovered near her seatbelt buckle, not to leave, but to give herself the illusion of control. She could walk off the plane if she had to, but doing so would mean missing her grandmother's funeral. Lena's voice came from behind, low but audible to a few passengers nearby. "This is unreal. I've seen people bring all kinds of medication on flights. Why is this different?" Colleen, still holding the inhaler, turned slightly so her voice projected across the cabin. "Either this goes in the trash or she gets off my plane." The words were sharp enough to slice through the background noise. A murmur spread among the passengers, some exchanging looks of disbelief, others shaking their heads. Ariana felt the heat of dozens of eyes on her, weighing her next move. Her mind ran through options. She could try to explain again, but Colleen had already decided the narrative. She could call her father, but she hated the thought of troubling him, unless there was no other choice. She could say nothing and hope someone else spoke up. But silence, she knew, would only let the moment calcify into injustice. Dr. Park rose halfway from his seat, despite the flight attendant's order. "This is not a behavioral issue. She is a minor with a medical emergency." Colleen stiffened. "Sir, I'm asking you to remain seated for your own safety." The exchange drew more attention. 2 young men across the aisle pulled out their phones. The older woman in the front row of coach began whispering to her seatmate, her tone tinged with outrage. Ariana could feel the momentum shifting slightly, the air thick with unspoken challenges to Colleen's authority. Still, her breathing grew shallower. The first edge of panic pressed at the corners of her mind. She looked down at her phone in her lap, the screen lighting up with an incoming call, her father's name displayed clearly. Her fingers trembled when she reached for it. She didn't answer. Not yet. Not with Colleen standing over her like a judge about to hand down a sentence. Colleen's expression hardened, Last chance. Trash it or leave. The inhaler was so close she could almost reach for it, but the act of doing so might escalate the situation further. Ariana's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, a physical reminder that the clock was ticking on her ability to stay calm. Her phone lit up again. The same caller. The same lifeline. She gripped it tightly, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing in her ears. The voices around her blurred into a low hum, Dr. Park's insistent reasoning, Lena's whispered commentary, the passengers' murmurs until all that remained was the knowledge that the next move she made would decide whether she stayed on this plane or walked away from it. Her phone vibrated a third time, the light reflecting off her bracelet like a flash of warning. The screen displayed the one name she had been hoping to avoid troubling today, but now it was the only one that mattered. Her breath caught in her throat as she thought about what would happen if she answered. Her hands shook as she tightened her grip on the phone. The metal armrest felt cool beneath her elbow, grounding her for just a moment before the decision pressed down. Somewhere beyond the aisle, Colleen's voice carried with finality. "Either way, we're not taking off until this is resolved." Ariana's phone vibrated again, longer this time, and the sound seemed to cut through the cabin air like a bell. She lifted it slightly, eyes locked on the screen, her pulse racing. She didn't know what she would say if she answered, only that this call could change everything. On the third ring, Ariana pressed the green button, her voice ragged. "Dad, they won't let me use my inhaler." The cabin seemed to fall into a hush, the air charged as if everyone on board had leaned in to listen. Her words were faint, but carried a tremor that pierced through the drone of the air vents. The earlier boarding mix-up, when she had been shifted from her assigned first-class seat to the back without a single explanation, now felt less like a harmless error and more like the opening move in something bigger. She had let it pass then, chalking it up to airline logistics. But now, that small displacement lingered in her thoughts like a thread she might one day pull to unravel the whole picture. She hadn't wanted to make this call. Her father, Commander Elijah Brooks, had a way of moving mountains when necessary, but Ariana had been determined to handle this on her own. Yet her chest ached, each breath shallower than the last, and the faint whistle at the back of her throat warned her that she was running out of time. The setting felt strangely smaller now, as if the walls of the Amerijet Airways cabin had drawn in. Passengers leaned into the aisles, phones raised, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. The open aircraft door let in a faint scent of fuel and the murmur of gate agents working just beyond sight. Every eye seemed to flick between Ariana and Colleen Draper, who still stood clutching the inhaler like evidence. Elijah's voice came through the speakerphone with the calm of someone who had commanded flight crews across continents. "Put me on speaker, Ariana." His tone wasn't a request. She obeyed, her fingers trembling as she tapped the button. His voice filled the cabin. "This is Commander Elijah Brooks, Director of Flight Operations for Amerijet Airways. To whom am I speaking?" Colleen froze mid-step. For a beat, the authority in his voice didn't seem to register. Then the name landed. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Around them, the cabin seemed to breathe in at once. The man across the aisle sat up straighter. Dr. Samuel Park's eyes sharpened in recognition of a shift in the balance of power. "Sir, this is Senior Flight Attendant Colleen Draper," she said, her voice thinner than before. "There's been a misunderstanding." Elijah's reply was steady, every word edged with controlled steel. "Colleen Draper, you are currently denying my daughter access to her prescribed asthma medication. Is that correct?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. "I was following standard protocol for unverified medication." There is no protocol that justifies withholding life-saving treatment from a minor, Elijah said. His voice was calm, but it cut through the air like a blade. You are violating the Americans with Disabilities Act, federal aviation regulations, and basic human decency. A few passengers murmured agreement, emboldened now that someone with real authority was speaking. Lena Vasquez angled her phone to catch Colleen's face, the stream of comments from her swelling audience moving faster than she could read. Dr. Park took a step into the aisle, his voice rising. Commander Brooks, this passenger is indeed in medical distress. I have been a practicing physician for 35 years. She needs her medication immediately. I hear you, Doctor, Elijah replied. Colleen, return the inhaler to Ariana at once. Colleen hesitated, her grip tightening slightly. Sir, I will be at your aircraft in less than 20 minutes, Elijah interrupted, because I am already in the terminal. This ends now. The words rippled through the cabin. Ariana lifted her gaze, her chest still heaving but her eyes clearer now. The thought of her father somewhere in the same building was like a rope thrown to someone drifting in deep water. Passengers shifted, the mood transforming from passive discomfort to active anticipation. Even the TSA agents who had been lingering near the doorway seemed to straighten, caught between their initial orders and the weight of the voice on the speaker. Elijah's tone hardened. You have two choices, Colleen. You can hand my daughter her medication and apologize, or you can explain your actions in writing to the federal authorities and Amerijet's executive board, right now. Colleen's eyes darted to Marisol Grant, the flight supervisor who had arrived during the exchange. Marisol's expression was pale and taut. She knew this was no longer a routine cabin dispute. Ariana felt the moment tilting, the decision hanging in the air like the pause before a storm breaks. She could almost hear the soft click of Lena's camera capturing the scene, the breath of passengers waiting to see what would happen next. Colleen's hand wavered, the inhaler suddenly looking smaller and more harmless than it had a moment before. But pride and protocol still warred across her face. Sir, I was only... Return it, Elijah said, his voice final. For the first time, Colleen's posture sagged. She extended the inhaler toward Ariana, who took it with fingers that felt almost weightless now. The plastic was warm from Colleen's grip, but familiar against her palm. She brought it to her lips, the medication delivering its relief like cool air rushing into a sealed room. The cabin exhaled collectively. Color began to return to her cheeks, though her breaths were still uneven. Elijah's voice, now softer, came through the speaker. Ariana, stay calm. I'll be there in a few minutes. He did not hang up. Instead, he spoke again, louder for everyone to hear. Colleen Draper, this conversation is not over. When I arrive, you will account for your conduct in full view of these passengers. A ripple of tension moved through the rows. Colleen swallowed hard, the authority she had worn like armor now visibly dented. Outside the open aircraft door, footsteps sounded faintly on the jet bridge, slow, deliberate, drawing nearer with each passing second. Passengers leaned toward the aisle, phones still raised, the air alive with the anticipation of someone powerful stepping into the frame. Colleen's eyes darted toward the sound, her breath catching just slightly. Ariana's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the knowledge that the next moment could undo everything Colleen had tried to impose on her. Colleen's hand trembled against her skirt seam as the sound of those footsteps grew louder, closer, impossible to ignore. The hum of the aircraft's systems was broken by the echo of measured footsteps on the jet bridge. Each strike of the soles against the metal walkway carried the weight of intent, a rhythm that made passengers straighten in their seats without realizing it. Ariana Brooks knew exactly whose steps those were, and so did Colleen Draper, though the senior flight attendant tried to keep her shoulders squared, as if nothing had changed. Elijah's promise over the phone, that calm assurance of "I'll be there in 18 minutes," ticked in Ariana's mind like the steady sweep of a second hand. She sat back, inhaler still warm in her grip, and felt the air in her lungs begin to expand more freely. But relief didn't erase the tension. It only sharpened her awareness of what was about to happen. The Amerijet cabin at Gate C-18 had become a kind of stage. The open aircraft door framed the entryway like a proscenium, and every passenger was now an audience member. A faint scent of jet fuel drifted in with the cool air from the terminal. Outside, the muted announcements of boarding for other flights seemed miles away. When Commander Elijah Brooks stepped into view, the space seemed to realign around him. His uniform was immaculate, 4 gold stripes on each sleeve catching the cabin light, the Amerijet insignia gleaming on his chest. At 6'3", with the posture of someone who had spent decades in the cockpit, he didn't have to raise his voice to command attention. His eyes swept the rows, assessing the scene with practiced precision. The passengers holding their phones, the TSA agents standing uncertainly in the aisle, Marisol Grant hovering by the forward galley, and finally his daughter still pale but breathing steadily in seat 23F. "Ariana," he said softly, his voice carrying easily through the silence. "How do you feel?" "Better now, Dad," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been in half an hour. He gave a single nod before turning toward Colleen. The shift in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth was gone, replaced by the clipped focus of an officer addressing a breach in protocol. "Senior Flight Attendant Colleen Draper," he began, "do you understand the magnitude of what you've done?" Colleen opened her mouth, but the first syllable faltered. "Sir, I was following—" "Stop!" Elijah said, the single word slicing through her defense. "You denied a minor access to her prescribed medical device during a respiratory emergency. You ignored a licensed physician's assessment. You humiliated a paying passenger in front of this cabin and the world beyond it. That is not protocol. That is negligence." The silence deepened, punctuated only by the faint hiss of the ventilation system. A man in row 20 lowered his phone for a moment, as if to confirm this was happening without the screen between him and reality. Elijah's gaze was steady. "Let me be very clear. You have 2 choices. 1, resign immediately, here and now, with a neutral reference. You leave this aircraft under your own power. Or 2, face termination for cause, permanent blacklisting from every major airline, personal liability for any damages arising from this incident, and the possibility of criminal charges for endangering the welfare of a minor." Colleen's breath quickened. Her eyes darted toward Marisol, but the supervisor only looked down at the galley counter, her face tight. "You have 60 seconds to decide," Elijah continued, checking his watch with military precision. 59. The passengers could feel the seconds stretching, each one a drumbeat in a room where no one moved. Lena Vasquez shifted slightly to get a better angle for her live stream, the audience counter on her phone now racing toward 300,000. Dr. Park's hands were clasped loosely in front of him, his gaze fixed on Colleen. 30 seconds, Elijah said. Colleen began, her voice cracking. 15. Her gaze moved once more to Ariana, who sat quietly, hands folded over her inhaler. The young woman's composure seemed to drain whatever defiance Colleen had left. "I resign," she said finally, the words barely audible. "Louder," Elijah instructed, his tone unchanged. Colleen swallowed. "I resign from Amerijet Airways, effective immediately." Elijah extended his hand. Badge and wings. With fingers that trembled, Colleen removed the polished metal wings from her uniform and unclipped her identification badge. She placed them in his palm. He pocketed them without ceremony. Security will escort you off this aircraft. You are no longer authorized to be aboard any Amerijet property. The TSA agents stepped forward, their role suddenly reversed. As they guided Colleen toward the door, the irony was not lost on the passengers. She paused briefly at the threshold, her face drawn. "Before you leave," Elijah said, "you will apologize to my daughter not for your job, but for denying her the basic dignity and care every passenger deserves." Colleen turned. Her voice was rough. "Ariana, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything." Ariana met her gaze evenly. "I forgive you. I hope you learned from this." Colleen gave a small nod, then stepped off the plane. The door remained open, but the air in the cabin seemed lighter. Elijah turned back toward Ariana. "Let's put you where you belong." The two of them began moving forward, the aisle parting like a tide. Passengers leaned back to give them room, some murmuring words of support, others applauding quietly. The open doorway ahead glowed with the light from the terminal, and Ariana could feel the shift in the room as they approached it. But just as Elijah reached for the curtain separating coach from first class, a voice called from behind. "Commander Brooks, corporate is on the line. They need to speak with you immediately." 2 hours later, Flight 227 finally climbed above the clouds, the tension in the cabin giving way to an undercurrent of relief. The engine's steady hum blended with the soft rustle of newspapers and the faint clink of glassware from the galley. Ariana sat by the window in her rightful seat, first class. 2A, her father, beside her, in a deadhead captain's seat the crew had secured after the confrontation. She thought back to something Elijah had told her once, after a difficult school year. Sometimes the real work starts after the storm. The confrontation on the ground had been the storm. But what came next? The ripple that would reach far beyond this cabin was already beginning. The light over the Pacific-bound cabin was a mellow gold, slanting through the windows and making the polished surfaces gleam. Service in first class had begun with hot towels and trays of beverages. Ariana sipped ginger ale, the carbonation crisp against her tongue, feeling the coolness settle her still sensitive throat. She watched the cloud tops drift past like slow-moving waves, aware that her breathing had returned to a steady, easy rhythm. Elijah was working his phone and tablet in rotation, switching between calls and emails with a precision that made it clear he was not simply talking about the incident, he was shaping its outcome. His voice was calm but direct, occasionally using phrases like compliance training schedule and federal oversight integration. Sarah Kim, the replacement flight attendant with a gentler demeanor, stopped by to check on Ariana. "Just wanted to see if you're feeling all right," she said, her tone warm and unhurried. "I've been with Amerijet 8 years, and what happened earlier, it's not how we do things." "Thank you," Ariana said, offering a small smile. "That means a lot." Dr. Samuel Park made his way up from the coach section during a break in service, his posture still upright and deliberate. "Your breathing looks much improved," he observed. "That's good. I've already contacted the American Medical Association about this. There's no reason an airline should have ambiguity about identifying medical devices." "Thank you for speaking up," Ariana told him. "If you hadn't, I don't know if I'd still be here." "Speaking up is the least any of us can do," he replied, his gaze steady. "But your composure under pressure, that's what people will remember." As Dr. Park returned to his seat, Lena Vasquez appeared at the front of the cabin. She carried her phone as though it were a news camera. "You're trending in 12 countries," she said with a grin. "My live stream's over 15 million views now. The comments are flooding with people telling their own stories, times they were profiled, denied service, humiliated. This is more than just you, Ariana." Elijah ended a call and turned his tablet toward Ariana. On the screen was a corporate bulletin stamped urgent in red. "Amerijet is implementing immediate reforms," he said. 40 hours of mandatory medical device recognition training for every crew member, effective within 30 days. And this, he tapped another section, a MedAlert profile integration. Passengers can upload their medical device information during check-in, and it will be visible to the entire crew before boarding. Ariana scrolled through the document, reading the bullet points in silence. The changes were exactly the kind of safeguards that would have prevented her ordeal. "This could help thousands of people," she said quietly. "It already will," Elijah replied. "American, United, Southwest, they've all reached out asking for copies of our policy changes. This isn't going to stop with Amerijet." Sarah returned with a tray, setting down a small plate of cheese and fruit, the kind of service that stood in stark contrast to the cramped tension of the coach section earlier. "Thought you could use something light," she said. Ariana thanked her, picking up a slice of cheddar but hardly tasting it. Her mind was already turning over what Lena had said, what Dr. Park was working on, and the speed with which Elijah had turned a personal crisis into systemic change. The low, warm light in the cabin made it feel almost serene, but she knew that outside this calm space, her name and her story were racing through news feeds, being replayed in offices, living rooms, and perhaps even in Amerijet's boardroom. Elijah's phone buzzed again. He listened for a moment, then glanced at Ariana with a faint smile. That was the FAA. They want to discuss industry-wide adoption of the MedAlert system. Ariana looked back out the window, the expanse of sky stretching endlessly ahead. She thought about her grandmother, about the funeral that still lay at the end of this trip, and about the reality that this journey had already reshaped her in ways she hadn't expected. The engines droned on, steady and sure. Passengers in first class chatted quietly, while in coach, the mood was lighter than before, with no sign of the earlier confrontation except in the phones still occasionally raised to capture candid moments. Elijah leaned slightly toward her. "This isn't over, Ariana. This is just the beginning." She met his gaze, sensing the truth in his words. Somewhere beneath the calm, the real momentum was building, ready to push far beyond this cabin. And as the plane cut a path through the sky, she knew she was part of it now, for better or for worse. 6 months later, Ariana stood in front of a congressional subcommittee, the Amerijet Airways logo projected behind her. The room was quiet except for the shuffle of papers and the soft hum of cameras recording from the press section. In that stillness, she felt the same steadying weight of her medical ID bracelet against her wrist, the same bracelet Colleen Draper had dismissed as fake jewelry on that flight. Now it glinted under the harsh committee lights, a reminder and a testament. She remembered her father telling her, in the days after the incident, that the reforms sparked by her case would ripple far beyond Amerijet. She hadn't been sure then if it was optimism or fact. But the data she carried now, in a folder thick with printed reports and letters, proved him right. The setting was formal and unmistakably Washington. Polished mahogany tables, high-backed chairs with brass plaques, microphones at each station, and nameplates identifying members from across the country. Behind the committee members sat aides with tablets, ready to pull up reference points from previous testimonies. Rows of observers filled the gallery, industry representatives in suits, advocacy group leaders in modest attire, and a cluster of reporters with notepads poised. Commander Elijah Brooks sat in the audience, his posture as crisp as his uniform, even though he wasn't here to speak. He gave her a small nod when she glanced his way, his presence steady, but letting her take the front. Dr. Samuel Park was also there, now officially a member of a federal advisory panel on medical accommodation in transportation. Lena Vasquez sat 2 rows behind them, wearing a simple navy dress, her phone in hand, but not recording. This was a moment she wanted to watch with her own eyes. Ariana began with the facts. Since the implementation of Amerijet's new MedAlert policy and mandatory medical device training, medical discrimination complaints have dropped by 78%. That's not a projection, it's documented in our first quarter review. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. She lifted a stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band. These are letters from parents across the country. Parents whose children no longer fear flying with their medical devices. Passengers who now board knowing their health needs will be recognized without a fight. Committee members leaned forward. A congresswoman from California asked her to describe the day of her flight. Ariana kept her tone even, but allowed the human details to surface: the reassigned seat without explanation, the confiscation of her inhaler, the dismissal of her ID bracelet, the intervention of strangers, and the phone call that changed the power dynamic in seconds. She avoided dramatics. The facts carried their own weight. Dr. Park was invited to speak next, explaining the medical implications of withholding treatment during respiratory distress and the critical need for crew recognition training. He credited Ariana's case for prompting the American Medical Association to partner with the Department of Transportation on standardized medical ID protocols now adopted by the TSA. Lena gave brief testimony on the role of documentation in holding institutions accountable. She spoke about her live stream not as an act of provocation, but as a citizen's record of an event in progress. "The truth," she said, "travels faster than any official statement when people can see it for themselves." Elijah's name came up in a committee member's question about corporate response. Ariana smiled faintly as she explained his new role as Vice President of Inclusive Operations at Amerijet, overseeing policy implementation across the entire airline. She noted that other carriers, American, United, Southwest, had already adopted the MedAlert model after seeing Amerijet's success. As the session neared its close, the committee chair invited Ariana to offer a final statement. She looked down briefly at her bracelet, then at the semicircle of lawmakers before her. "What happened to me could have ended very differently. But it didn't, because people were willing to speak up. My father, a passenger with medical expertise, someone willing to document what they saw. When we witness injustice, we can document it, or we can become complicit in it. I was lucky that day. I had allies, and I had proof. The challenge is to make sure no one has to rely on luck for dignity." The room was silent for a moment before the chair thanked her. Cameras flashed, the sound of shutters rapid and overlapping. Members of the committee stood, signaling the end of the hearing. As Ariana gathered her papers, she caught her father's eye. There was pride there, yes, but also a recognition that this was not an end point. It was a beginning. Reporters began to surge forward, their voices calling her name, microphones extended over the small space between the dais and the aisle. The bright bursts of camera flashes lit her face as she stepped away from the witness table, the air alive with questions she had yet to answer. In the quiet before the boarding call, Ariana Brooks had only been another traveler, a young woman on her way to honor her grandmother's memory. She was carrying not only her luggage, but the silent weight of a chronic condition that demanded constant readiness. Her inhaler, her medical ID bracelet, her careful composure, these were not accessories, but lifelines. Yet in the space of minutes, a routine flight became a crucible where dignity and prejudice collided in full view of strangers. The moment Colleen Draper's hand closed over that inhaler, it was more than an object being seized. It was control, autonomy, and safety being stripped away under the guise of protocol. From that moment, the cabin air became heavier. Words like unverified medication and safety procedures floated above the rows, carrying with them the unmistakable undertone of assumption. Ariana's calm explanations were met with a wall of disbelief. Her bracelet was dismissed as fake. Her condition was framed as a threat. It would have been easy for her to crumble, to plead, to allow the narrative to be rewritten by someone in uniform. But instead, she held her voice steady, even as her lungs betrayed the rising urgency of the moment. Quiet strength is not passive. It is a choice made in the tension between what you feel and how you respond. Ariana's stillness, her refusal to lash out or surrender to panic, became its own form of defiance. Around her, others began to make their choices. Dr. Samuel Park broke the professional silence to name the truth. This was a medical emergency. Lena Vasquez lifted her phone, recording not just images, but evidence, an unshakable record against the tide of denial. These were not just bystanders, they were allies, and their courage carried weight. The cabin became a microcosm of a larger truth. Systemic bias often hides behind policy. The language of safety, the invocation of rules, can be twisted into tools of exclusion when wielded without humanity. Colleen believed her authority was enough to shield her from challenge. What she did not count on was that authority can be answered with greater authority, especially when that authority is backed by truth. The moment Ariana answered her father's call, the power dynamic shifted. Commander Elijah Brooks was not simply a parent rushing to his child's defense. He was a senior figure in the very system that Colleen believed would protect her decisions. His voice carried not only personal outrage, but institutional weight. In seconds, the conversation moved from a one-sided enforcement of rules to a public reckoning that left no place to hide. Elijah's arrival on the jet bridge was not the dramatic entrance of a hero, but the measured walk of someone who understood the gravity of every step. His confrontation with Colleen was direct, factual, and unflinching. He named her actions for what they were: violations of law, policy, and decency, and he offered her a choice. In the end, she resigned not because she was persuaded, but because the truth left her no defensible ground to stand on. That moment of public accountability was cathartic, but it was not the end. The real victory came in the hours and months that followed, when a Mary Jet implemented reforms that would protect countless other passengers. The MedAlert system, the mandatory training, the swift adoption of these policies by other airlines, these were tangible results born of an 18-minute injustice that might otherwise have gone unseen. Ariana's story did not fade when the cameras turned off. She carried it into congressional hearings, into conversations with policymakers, into the collective consciousness of an industry long overdue for change. Her testimony was not angry or theatrical. It was measured, clear, and rooted in lived experience. She spoke for herself, but also for those whose voices are too often dismissed or silenced before they are even heard. The lesson is simple but profound. The difference between superficial policy and genuine respect lies in the willingness to see the human being in front of you. Safety protocols are necessary, but they must be tempered with compassion, with the humility to listen, and with the courage to admit when you are wrong. The moment we use policy to justify harm, we have lost sight of the very purpose of having rules at all. It also takes immense courage to confront not just one person, but the system that enables them. Elijah could have spoken only as a father, but he chose to speak as a leader committed to transforming the culture of his profession. Dr. Park could have stayed seated, but he chose to stand. Lena could have put her phone away, but she chose to document. These choices, small in the moment, became the scaffolding on which justice was built. For Ariana, the journey from that narrow coach seat to the floor of Congress was a testament to what can happen when quiet dignity is paired with decisive action. She did not shout. She did not make threats. She let the truth, and those who recognized it, do the work. In doing so, she reminded us that dignity is not granted by others, it is claimed and defended by the one who carries it. Her story underscores that justice is not just about punishment. It is about restoration, restoring trust, restoring fairness, restoring the sense that when you board a plane, walk into a store, or enter a courtroom, you will be treated with the same respect as anyone else. That restoration cannot happen without accountability, and accountability cannot happen without people willing to risk their comfort to speak up. The philosophy remains: true authority serves, it does not diminish. If you have ever been told to just let it go, Ariana's story is a reminder that letting it go often means letting it happen again to you, or to someone else. If you have ever hesitated to intervene, it is proof that your voice can tip the balance. If you have ever doubted that one incident could spark change, remember that this one did. So let this be more than a story. Let it be a call to vigilance, to empathy, and to the belief that no one is too young, too ordinary, or too outnumbered to change the rules when the rules are wrong. The world will not fix itself. It moves when people push. If you believe in the fight for dignity against prejudice, if you value the courage to stand against systemic bias, if you know the strength of quiet resilience and the power of allyship, then carry this forward. Share it, remember it, and be ready when your moment comes. And if you like this story, then leave a number 1 in the comments and subscribe to our channel to hear the next story.